International report on Chibok girls and continuous abduction of school children in Nigeria is our centerpiece for this morning. We are now joined virtually from London, the United Kingdom, by human rights activist and one of the Bring Back Our Girls campaigners, Bukola Shonibare. Also joining us via phone a little bit later will be a security consultant, Dr. Yahuza Ahmed. Hello, good morning and welcome to Daybreak.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Now, the story about, the 24 Chibok parents being dead, and also 8 years later, 109 girls are still in captivity. Could you comment on that?
I think the first thing that we must note is that the very abduction of the Chibok girls connotes a failure of the government. And by failure, I mean gauging the responsibility of the government on the constitutional requirement by Section 14, subsection 2B of our Constitution, that the government of Nigeria has the primary responsibility to ensure the security and welfare of people. Now, if that responsibility has been breached to the extent that young girls can be abducted, then it tells you that we have not gotten something right, or we didn't get something right as it relates to, securing Nigerians generally, and most importantly, securing the school children. But, before we move on to the next question, just to put on the table the fact that on April 14, 2014, 276 girls were abducted in Chibok. 57 escaped within the first week. And so we have been campaigning for 219 of the girls. 110 of the girls have been brought back. Out of that 110, 7 were found and 103 were released either by negotiation or other means. So right now, 109 are still remaining. There are speculations that 16 out of that 109 girls are still have been killed. So my immediate reaction would be the fact that the primary responsibility of the government was breached by the abduction of the Chibok girls. I hope that as we move on, we will talk about how that connects to the other abductions of school children that we have seen, and how we may not have learned lessons from the Chibok girls abduction.
Thank you, Bukola. Again, good to see you again. What would do you have any update? And when I say you now, I mean members of that campaign. You've just given us one as it borders on the possibility that a number of them would have been dead. Do you have any update with regards to their well-being, or whether or not there are some kind of negotiations going on between the government and whatever quarter it was, that helped in releasing the earlier 107? Are there chances that we may see more releases anytime soon?
I think that's one of the frustrations that we have been having, the sheer fact that we have not had any update. The last time Chibok girls were brought back was sometime in 2017. President Muhammad Buhari came into office in 2015, and I recall that one of the promises that was made during his inauguration speech was that the fight against the terrorists cannot be said to be won until all our Chibok girls are back, along with others in captivity. So we literally held on to that particular promise, not just because it is coming from a former military general, but also because we believe that, with the landscape of things at the time, there is possibility that that particular promise would actually be achieved. And not also forgetting the fact that Section 18 of the Constitution guarantees the right to education. So one would expect that constitutionally we would protect, the right of children to education. So far, 21 of the girls were brought back in 2016 actually, a year after President Buhari came into power. And then in 2017, we had 82 other girls brought back. And since then, what we have had are girls coming back in one way or the other. That's the 7 that I've talked about. So since 2017, we've not seen any concerted effort, we've not had any coordinated, operation that is going on, whether military or non-military. We've not heard that maybe negotiation is going on. Since then, and I'm talking about 5 years between then and now, we've not heard anything. So we are unsure if there's any action that is being taken, and if any action is being taken, the parents are unaware of that action.
Okay. Now, with the issue of the Chibok girls and other pockets of abductions that we see, within the country, what does this really say about the safety of the girl child in Nigeria?
Thank you. Historically, girls in Nigeria have actually been disproportionately affected by violent extremism going on in the Northeast, and now even banditry. So every time we have crisis, even health pandemics such as the COVID-19 pandemic, it's typically exacerbate existing inequality. And so what we have seen so far is the fact that when there is a conflict or when there is a crisis, young girls are usually much more affected. It doesn't mean boys are not affected, but girls are much more affected. So the effect of all of this is the fact that we have young children not going to school, we have schools being destroyed, and I'll put some figures to it. Yesterday, Amnesty International released a report. And prior to that, UNICEF has also released a particular report. And in that report, some shocking figures were actually released. And I think that will put proper context to the reality of the problem that we are dealing with. In the UNICEF report, it was reported that over 1,400 schools have actually been destroyed so far. And the UNICEF report also says that 2,295 teachers have been killed across the Northeast in this protracted conflict that has been going on. Coming back to Amnesty's report, Amnesty highlighted 3 key things in the report that they submitted. First is the fact that we seem to have not learned lessons from the Chibok girls' abduction, because due to, not just the abduction of the girls, but also a lot more conflict that is going on that affect directly school children and then school girls, we seem not to have learned from the Chibok girls' abduction. And one thing that I always say is that what would Nigeria boast of that has changed in terms of the security and safety of schools because April 14th happened, because the Chibok girls' abduction happened? We can't pin any concrete thing. When a young girl called Amber Egerman was abducted in the United States, it led into what became the Amber Alert in the United States. What can we say has happened because Chibok girls happened? So first is the lesson. The second is the figures that really shows the prevalence of, not just conflict, but how it affects school children and even education generally. Now, since the abduction of the Chibok girls, Amnesty reports that over 1,500 school children, who are mostly girls, have been abducted by armed groups. Now, on the one hand, we are dealing with an extremist ideological group who believe that Westernization or Western education is forbidden in the Northeast. And in that mix, they believe that young girls should not go to school. So girls are being affected on that front. On the other front is in the Northwest, where young children and school children, including girls, are being abducted for pecuniary purposes or for economic gains. And so what we have then seen is that since this abduction, 120 children still remain in abduction. And so even in that, between December 2020 and October 2021, 1,436 school children have actually, been abducted, including 17 teachers. We cannot run a country like that where education is so threatened, and where we put parents in the difficult position where they have to choose between sending their children to school or keeping them alive. And the third thing that the Amnesty report highlighted, which will be my closing thought on this question, is the issue around early warning and rapid response. Nigeria is a part of the ECOWAS community, and part of the work that I've done with the ECOWAS is the setting up of national early warning and rapid response systems across all member states, including Nigeria. So what is the essence of this early warning and rapid response system if it is not translating to results, and if it is not ensuring that we can protect all Nigerians, but particularly schools, school teachers, and school children? So I think there's much more that we can do. And this report of yesterday by Amnesty and the earlier one by UNICEF gives us a good background to further this conversation.
Thank you, Bukola. Such mind-boggling statistics indeed that impact on individual lives. They have said there are over 1,000 schools destroyed, over 2,000 teachers killed, over 11,000 schools shut down, over 20 teachers currently adopted. No nation can aspire to anything with living with this amount of calamity. But moving away from highlighting what has happened or what had continued to happen and how we have not learned lessons. I know members of your group, emphasized prior to this report that you advocated some kind of reforms against kidnapping. From all of those early warning signs that we have seen, and all of the groups that we have belonged to, and all of the intelligence reports available to us, some of them which you have seen, what kind of reforms do you think we need at this time to make the schools safe, or if you like, the society generally safe, for not just the girl child, but for those we indeed call the future of this country?
Very good question. So aside advocating on the Bring Back Our Girls campaign, I've also had to do humanitarian work in Nigeria's northeast. And with that, I have had to travel to literally all of the northeastern states. But most importantly, I had to go into some of those communities. And I mentioned that because the reality of what you see on the ground, sometimes is completely different from what we can report in text or what we can talk about. And the reality, put faces to all of these figures that we have been talking about, and which you have also rightly proceeded on. I think that, when it comes to reform, we really need to begin to consider military and non-military approach to not just curbing the insecurity issue that we have, but in also ensuring that school children are able to safely go to school. And I will hinge on that safely. Nigeria is party to the Safe School Declaration. I was part of that process in ensuring that Nigeria is part of that, is part of the safe schools that have adopted the Safe School Declaration. What the Safe School Declaration does is to set a minimum standard of security and safety of schools. Safe School Declaration came as a result of the Chibok girls' abduction in the international community, and Nigeria is a party to it. So I think that we can use that particular framework, and I'll give some basic examples. Safe School Declaration, for instance, set a minimum standard for security and safety as it relates to, for instance, presence of military personnel outside the perimeters of schools, presence of non-military personnel, but security personnel within the perimeters of school, certain level of fencing in school, muster point, fire drills, teaching children in conflict-prone zones on how to respond in case there's an attacker. And if you look at the Chibok girls abduction and even the Dapchi abduction and several other abduction, one thing has been common. The insurgents will come and they will pose as military men. What are we doing, or what sort of training are we giving to the children in that region to say this is how to identify these people, this is the things that you must do. So things as basic as non-military approaches like sensitization and education on one hand, putting in place a lot of these safety and security measures would actually help. But beyond that is also for us to lay on the table certain demands or calls. First is the fact that as much as possible, these military or non-military approaches must lead to the prevention of the kind of abduction that happened, not just in Chibok 8 years ago, but after Chibok, and that we continue to see. So that means that, we must ensure also that there is prosecution of those who have been suspected, to partake in this. In international law, we say there is individual and collective responsibility. Who is taking criminal responsibilities? All those that have been caught. Who is taking criminal responsibility? And until parents and Nigerians can see this, we will not believe that indeed the Nigerian government is serious about this. And I'll close by saying that as much as possible, we must rescue all of the children still in abduction. Leah Sharibu, Alice Ngada, several others, the 109 Chibok girls, and so many missing and abducted people that we don't even have names and faces to. It is one of the reasons the Bring Back Our Girls campaigned that we should have a missing persons register. At least that way we can know the Nigerians that are missing, those that we can't even account for. And also the fact that the Nigerian government needs to do well in communicating with the parents of the Chibok girls. The parents keep complaining that they have not been hearing from the Nigerian government. Nigerians have not been hearing anything as it relates to the Chibok girls. And I think this is one thing that the Nigerian government must take action on. So my closing thought on that question will be that there has to be a combination of military and non-military approaches. And the Safe School Declaration is a good framework for the military, for the non-military approach to ensuring security and safety of schools.
Okay. So currently, Nigeria as a country is already grappling with, a dilapidated educational system. So how, with these pockets of abductions that we see and the whole level of insecurity in the country, further exacerbates the problem for us?
I think that if you look at the trend as it relates to insecurity, whether what we call banditry in the Northwest or Northeast in terms of terrorism or violent extremism, you will notice that at the center of it are school children. So for every time there is conflict or crisis, you have a situation where the weak and the vulnerable, or those that have been historically marginalized, or those that are affected by historical inequality will always be at the center of that particular effect. So I think that, one thing that we must do well is a lot of nations will not be able to avoid conflict and crisis. But one responsibility government must have is to make sure that the weak and vulnerable, such as school children, are not affected by this. And I think that some of the ideas that I put forward as it relates to security and safety of schools will further, prevent, school children, but particularly educational structures, educational system from being affected when we have cases of or inevitable cases of conflict and crisis. Let me use COVID-19 as an example. When we had the outbreak of COVID-19, you would notice that those who were hugely affected, not undermining the effect on all other Nigerians, are school children as well, particularly those in rural communities or those in poor communities. So even though some lessons were moved online, children in regions where they don't even have internet or they don't even have electricity were unable to access any form of online learning. Why? Because prior to the outbreak of that crisis, those children have been marginalized or have not had enough of those kind of infrastructure that we're talking about. So I think that we should not wait until conflict or crisis happen before we put a lot of these measures in place.
Thank you, Bukola. Finally, I would like to get your thoughts. We have dwelled quite a while on the adoptions on those affected. Has there been, from your interactions and follow-ups, some kind of measures? I know you mentioned indeed that the parents have not heard from them, but you said everybody must take responsibility. And so I am interested in trauma counseling, even for these people who have had to live with this pain, this doubt, this confusion for over 8 years. Have we done anything as a society to sort of comfort them, offer some kind of hope? And I mean, avoid situations where we have lost 24 of them, perhaps to anxiety or whatever the case may be. What are we doing to take care of those that they left behind?
Very good question. One of the things we did as a campaign, the Bring Back Our Girls campaign, was to come up with what we call the 3R system. And the 3R system is rehabilitation, resocialization, and reintegration. And those 3Rs, for us, we developed it as a framework, to help the federal government and we didn't just develop it as, just individual points. We broke it down into specific actions that can and that should be taken in order to make sure that the girls that have returned, as well as their family, are able to go through some form of rehabilitation and resocialization. I'll give you an example of one of the experiences that I had in one of the IDP camps that I went to in Borno State, particularly. That's the Dalori IDP camp. I can't recall if it's Dalori 1 or Dalori 2 because they had to separate the camps at some point due to the high number or the influx of people who were coming inside there. And I recall meeting a young girl when we were distributing the food and everything. And the young girl just stayed behind, even though there was, option for her to come forward to take her food. And so when I went close, she said, no, that it's not yet her turn, that she is in Sambisa. So I said, what do you mean you are in Sambisa? So apparently in that camp, there is a section where they call Sambisa. And in that section, it is reserved for those who have had direct encounter with Boko Haram, who have been pregnant for Boko Haram members, or who have been abducted and rescued. And so they believe that those people carry bad blood. So if you read one of the UNICEF reports, they have a report titled Bad Blood. So those people are the people that are left in that place. So that tells you that psychologically, and if you read some of the report, especially the Amnesty report, it talks about how even some of those that have been brought back are unable to be adequately or effectively resocialized in the community because the community believes that, they carry bad blood, their children don't belong in their communities, that because they have become pregnant for a Boko Haram member or they have had encounter with Boko Haram members, so they have become a menace to the society. So it tells you that the work of reintegration, resocialization, and rehabilitation, is not just on the part of those that have come back. Those that have come back need to go through some form of mental and psychological support and counseling. Not just, those that we know, like the Chibok girls, everyone. Let's not take for granted the issue of mental health. And then those that have returned also need to go through some form of resocialization on both ends, both the community side and for their family members. A lot of them need to be sensitized, need to understand the fact that you have had encounter with even some of the Boko Haram members are those who were abducted from communities out of their will. Not all of them joined voluntarily. So even those who were abducted and became Boko Haram fighters are also as much victims of these Boko Haram abductions as much as those that they are made to attack and kill. So I think that if the federal government, and not just the federal government, even non-governmental organizations, can take up, such a kind of structure like the 3R system, we can make sure that both those who have been abducted before and those in the communities can go through some form of rehabilitation, resocialization, and reintegration back into the communities. It takes a framework, and the framework must be actionable, and the framework must be acted upon, and the effect or the outcome or the impact of those framework must be monitored and evaluated. And if it is not working, we keep changing it until it serves the best interest of those we are trying to protect.
Thoughts, Bukola. It takes a framework, you said. And then finally, I'm sure Nigerians would like to know what seemed to be happening with the other ones we have rescued. We know some of them were taken out of those communities. Some had some kind of scholarship. Have you continued to remain in touch with their progress and development? Are there updates you would like to share with us?
Absolutely. Some of the girls who were able to be sponsored by a Christian organization who went to the United States, some of them have finished school. One of them is trying to be a doctor. One of them have finished a program on social work. Yesterday, we had the 6th annual Chibok Girls Lecture, and one of the girls who escaped also spoke when we had that particular engagement. I know that when some of the Chibok girls were brought back, the Nigerian government, conducted some form of rehabilitation, housed them in a particular location. And in that particular location, they were made to go through some form of counseling, some form of re-education. Some of them have been able to go back to school. Some philanthropists in Nigeria have also been able to sponsor some of them to go to school in one of the top universities in northeastern part of Nigeria. Some of these children did not go back to school. Some of them, their parents are too afraid to let them go back to school so that there will not be another abduction. And so these are pockets of things that are going on. And let me say that Chibok girls is a major part of our history in Nigeria. And I think that the federal government needs to tell the story, not just of the abduction, but what has happened afterwards. Even when an unfortunate situation like that has happened, it can be turned around for good, not just for the children, but for other people. And the best way we can know whether it is being turned around for good is if we tell the story, the success story of what is going on with the ones that have returned, and the effort that is being made to make sure that those that have returned but who are yet to go to school or who are yet to have some form of program, we can update Nigerians, so just so that we can know that an unfortunate situation does not mean the end of your life.
Thank you very much, Bukola. If you are just joining us, we've been speaking with Bukola Shonibare, a human rights activist and one of the campaigners of the Bring Back Our Girls. I dare to say, on behalf of myself, Trust Television, and Zainab, that this country owes you a debt of gratitude. Continue to do what you do and continue to fill those gaps for us. Someday we hope that the government will wake up to its responsibility and lead in the way that it's supposed to engender hope. And like you said, we would be able to turn this page for good and tell our story in the most positive way that we can. Do have a great day in the UK.
Thank you so much for having me, and well done to Trust TV.